Well, hi there. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, wherever the heck you are in the world watching. I'm CJ Golden.
Hi, and I'm Wendy Green, and welcome to the Caregivers Bakery. This is your opportunity to sit back. CJ says, don't put your feet up because then she's going to fall over.
Yeah.
But sit back and relax and enjoy this 30 minutes with us and then have a lovely taste testing at the end.
Yeah, it's I'm just throwing this in even early that we get you the recipe the day of the show, but if you want it in advance to do the taste testing with us, and let me tell you, you want to do this one.
Gosh, yeah.
Just send me an email, authorcjgolden@gmail.com. We'll get the recipe to you a week in advance, a couple of days in advance, whenever, and you can have a taste testing. Now, Wendy and
yes,
folks,
ma'am.
I'm looking out my window, and it's a gorgeous spring day. I'm in Connecticut. I bet it's closing in on 70 degrees.
Nice.
And I'm feeling spring, and I found some of my spring clothing.
Yeah.
See, a spring shirt.
You're looking springy.
And I went out and I had my first pedicure in a year. And I had my hair done. I had it cut and I had it colored.
The other side.
The other side. I can't do that. There it is.
There it is.
Oh, I just gave it away. It's not natural, folks. I'm sorry. I thought you saw it. But I'm feeling good, and I'm feeling like I'm being a caregiver to me. I'm really taking care of myself in ways that are important to me. A little color in my hair, a little color on my toes, being able to go outside and walk. I'm caregiving for me. Wendy, do you find ways now, in the spring particularly, that you're caregiving for yourself?
Well, I think what's opening it up for both of us, CJ, is that we're both double vaccinated.
Yeah.
So it makes it feel safer, even though we're still being cautious, it makes it feel safer to go out. And I actually am getting my hair highlights for the first time in 3 years on Tuesday. Yeah, but I think that, the biggest aha for me after the vaccines was I went to visit my mother. So my mother's 90. I haven't been in her house since a year ago, March. And we made this plan and I walked in the door and she hugged me and we both went, oh, we hugged. And it was just like such an amazing, wonderful feeling. So yes, spring, vaccines, it's definitely helping to be more caring of ourselves.
Exactly. Except when I try to hug my 11-year-old grandson, he doesn't love that as much as I do.
Yeah, I know, right? They get to that age. So CJ,
yes,
I know you mentioned the recipes and how they can email you for that, but we also have the sweet spot coming up. Can you tell them a little bit about that?
I can do that. The sweet spot is we're going to have our second special event, the Sweet Spot, over Zoom on April 21st, Wednesday. The Sweet Spot is an hour where we get together with a guest and we can discuss, we can question, we can be a community that actually interacts. Here we have our chat, and I love seeing your comments on our chat box and your questions. But on the Sweet Spot, we're actually together as a community. And I won't tell you now who our next Sweet Spot guest is, but I think you're going to be very pleased when you hear who it is.
Yeah, so you have to register because it is a private Zoom. The registration link is on the Facebook page.
Yeah. So what I want you to do now, though, is in that chat box, I want you to share, please, this show with your friends. Put down the names, put the ampersand in front of it. They'll get notification that we're here. We're here for caregivers everywhere.
And say
Oh,
hi. Let us know you're
oh
here
yeah.
too.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh yeah. It would be nice.
We always like to see who's here.
Wendy, would you introduce this week's guest, please?
I would be happy to. Let me bring Kate on. Hello, Kate Washington.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it is totally our pleasure. So let me tell the folks a little bit about you. Kate Washington is a journalist, a freelance writer, a dining critic for the Sacramento Bee. She holds a PhD in Victorian literature from Stanford University. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And she's the author of a brand new book that we'll talk about. And the book is called Already Toast, Caregiving and Burnout in America. Kate came to our attention when our friend and Caregivers Bakery community member, Doris McClellan, saw an opinion article in the New York Times, which talked about Kate, her book, her journey as a caregiver, and her subsequent quest to bring caregivers the emotional and financial support they so deserve and are lacking in our society. Kate, that's such important work that you're doing. Thank you.
Oh,
Yeah,
thank you.
And Kate, we would love to hear. I want to hear everything about you, and your story. But would you backtrack from the beginning, please, and tell us about the time that you became a caregiver under fire? Who knew? Your husband, Brad, 42, was he 42 when he diagnosed?
I was 42, he was 44.
You're 42. Oh,
Same idea.
When he was diagnosed with cancer. Give us all, please, your journey.
Sure, I'd be glad to. So, as I said, I was 42, Brad was 44. Our kids were 9 and 5. We have 2 daughters. They're 15 and 11 now. And it actually happened, caregiving was really the last thing on my mind. We live in Sacramento. I had always expected at one time to care for my mom, who also lived in Sacramento, but she had sadly and suddenly died when my younger child was a baby. So that was kind of, not on the agenda. I had expected to take care of her, but, I was really thinking about caring for my children, but I was also seeing those responsibilities ease a little bit because they both hit elementary school, which is like the moment that all parents are waiting for, at least I was. And in fact, on the very day that she went off to kindergarten, my husband came to me. I was working, I had a little free desk for my freelance writing work in the corner of our kitchen. And I was sitting down and thinking like, okay, now I'm going to get back to it. Like Lucy's in school. I'm ready to roll. And he said, I have these funny lumps on my jawline. Like, do you think I should go to the doctor? I said, yeah, I really do think you should. And he'd been losing weight and it was just a little unsettling, but it took about 6 months after that to get him a diagnosis and further months after that for him to get into treatment, because at first the doctors weren't really sure if the lumps were going to be anything. And then they thought it turned out he had a form of lymphoma that they thought might never need treatment, might be more of a watch and wait situation, which there are some types of lymphoma that are like that. But fast forward all the way to May of my daughter's kindergarten year. So it had been several months, and the feeling of being a caregiver wasn't really on my mind because, I was going with Brad to appointments and things, and researching his disease, but not really, not really hands-on caring for him. And then one day he suddenly started coughing up blood very dramatically as we were sitting down to dinner. And I ran across the driveway and I banged on my neighbor's door and was like, can you come and stay with the girls? I have to take Brad to the emergency room. And we happened to live pretty close to the hospital where he got his care and all his subsequent care, which was quite a lot. And that was really the moment of kind of baptism by fire as a caregiver. It was a Saturday evening, like the first hot night of May. And I drove through every red light to the emergency room, laying on the horn. And And we got there, and it turned out that he'd had a ruptured lung tumor that had been growing quite aggressively and had gone undetected, and he needed chemo really urgently. So he was in the hospital for 2.5 weeks after that, because then his lung collapsed as he was getting the chemo, and it was a real touch and go situation. And from there was no doubt in my mind that I was fully in a caregiving journey, that had a lot of twists and turns for him. And I'll just give the spoiler is that even though he had a really devastating and challenging treatment course, he made it. He's doing better now, though he's not fully recovered to where he was before. But I want everybody to know, the subject of caregiving can be really hard, but there is at least something. I'm really fortunate to have something of a happy ending to mine.
That just sounds so frightening, Kate. And you had the two little ones thinking that you were going to suddenly have this sense of freedom.
Mm-hmm.
How did you, yes, baptism by fire, but how did you actually navigate through that?
It's a little bit of a blur. And I remember talking to a friend at one point who'd had a really challenging caregiving time that actually included having a newborn at the time that her spouse became very ill. And I asked her how she got through it. And she said, well, I had a lack of any other reasonable options. You just have to get through it, So I'm sure there were some school projects that we missed. And certainly we scaled back on some of the optional activities. But I definitely remember racing from the hospital to my daughter's junior production of Annie, in which she was kind of an extra, but there was a lot of just scrambling to cover all the bases, and to keep people informed, to be in touch with doctors, to be getting an understanding of the treatment course. And then when Brad came home from the hospital, there was a lot of hands-on care to do, which came as a further surprise to me. And I'm sure you and a lot of your community are really familiar with how much hands-on care now has become the responsibility of families and of unpaid family caregivers. And that came as a real surprise for me and was difficult to adjust to.
But you did adjust.
Mm-hmm.
What helped? Besides, I don't know, maybe with me it was the wine, but
I hit some wine, I won't lie, but about a week into Brad's first hospitalization, we'd really been going back and forth. Where we lived, we didn't have family. My family is about an hour and a half away, and Brad's family was across the continent and in Canada. And Brad was at first very reluctant to call on his parents. He didn't want to, not out of antipathy, but because he didn't want to alarm them or impose on them. And finally, he made the call, and it was early May when he went into the hospital. And actually the day before Mother's Day, he said, ask my mom to come. And I sent her an email late at night, my time, in Pacific time. And by the time I got up at 6 a.m. the next morning, I had an email from her saying she was at the airport on a plane to fly and come. And so that kind of family relief, I'm getting emotional talking about it, was incredible, to have another support person, because I think, there's all kinds of caregiving and caregiving situations, and they're all hard. One of the things that was hard for me as a spousal caregiver was that I lost the support person who was my partner. And I think that's a common issue for spousal caregivers. And so to have somebody else come in and be by my side in that role was really critical. We had friends who rallied around, and lots of support for meals and help, friends who would take our kids every now and again. So, community support and family support was really critical. I think there still remains a big gap, and this is something I write about quite a bit in the book. There are a lot of gaps in the broader systemic and societal support for caregivers that would go a long way toward helping people. People struggle with the lack of paid leave. It's really hard for caregivers to take time away from work, and a lot of caregivers end up losing work hours or having to leave work entirely with like difficult economic consequences. I mean, I was fortunate to have the flexibility of being a freelancer, so I could drop a lot of, a lot of projects that I might have had on the books, but that obviously comes with economic consequences as well. But that's certainly not the case for everybody. So I just want to call attention to how, even though all of us, can muster our communities, or many of us have communities to muster and help us, the broader society could use a little more light and attention and care for this issue, and for people who are doing critical work, taking care of vulnerable, ill, and elderly loved ones.
And it's interesting because in the book, Wendy, I apologize.
Go ahead.
For interrupting. I always do. Sorry. In the book, you mentioned that you noticed something. This is something, ladies, the women who are out there, very interesting, that Kate noticed that all of the extra things she was doing, the household chores, the caring for the girls, the cooking, the shopping, the whatever, all of that work didn't increase because she had been doing all of that even before Brad got ill.
Well, I mean, it increased some, but it didn't double. I thought that we were on more of an equal playing field in terms of domestic and, invisible labor and kind of the mental load. But I did really realize, like, oh, I was actually the default parent, and I was doing a lot of this stuff. Brad's work responsibilities had really increased over the preceding few years, and I had flexibility. And I realized the degree to which I had already been taking on quite a bit more. So it was a really interesting lesson for me in not just the intensity of caregiving and the ways that falls disproportionately on women, but also in how much invisible labor and domestic labor was already on my plate, and how much that's already that falls on women. And I think that's been a real lesson of the pandemic for millions of families. It's like women are holding up a lot.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you, as a writer, Kate, so you've been writing about food a lot, and then you had this caregiving experience. And so now you took on this whole new mission to point out where the gaps are. What is your ultimate hope or goal for this book?
Well, my goal, it's twofold. I think one of the things that I really wanted to do, aside from just telling my own story, was I really hope to help other caregivers feel seen and feel validated in the really important work that they're doing. I think unpaid family caregiving often takes place behind closed doors. It can be really challenging. It can bring up a lot of mixed and really difficult emotions that a lot of people feel guilty about or feel bad about. And I sometimes did too. I sometimes really felt like, what's wrong with me that I'm not happy to drop everything in my life to do this work, and I wasn't happy to do it. I was happy to help ensure that Brad survived, and I wanted to do that and be part of that urgent fight for his life. But I didn't want to do it at the cost of everything that I cared about.
Yeah, right.
And, I wanted to be a person and have my own concerns as well at the same time. And so that complicated stew of emotions of feeling, sometimes resentful of the responsibility while still loving my husband, and feeling bad that I wasn't more happy to be doing that kind of care work, was really difficult. And so I wanted, and I've been really fortunate to receive a lot of emails and outreach from some readers who do say that they feel seen, and that it is an expression of what they're experiencing as caregivers, even though my individual story is, of course, quite different from the many millions of other individual caregiving stories out there. And on a broader level from that, I really hope that telling this story and talking openly about some of the ways that we as a society are really failing caregivers and then in turn failing the people they care for will help, that at the present time, there's a really big policy push toward changing the ways we support care and caregivers. And it's really front and center in the national agenda, which is incredibly exciting to see.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of work to do at state and local levels as well as federal. And of course, other countries have their own, ways of supporting care. But, if I can be some small part of storytelling in a way that helps to make change, and helps to bring this national conversation more into the fore and move toward bigger supports for caregivers, then I'll be really, really happy with that.
You will have done very well. I need to ask, because I know I would like you to tell everyone, where did you get the title? Already toast?
Well, I tell that story
Yes.
right in the beginning of the book. The title came from an online quiz I took, and I can no longer remember if it was, exactly where I got it, but it was a doctor's appointment that I'd been in, and I kind of had a breakdown. I started crying in Brad's doctor's appointment. I couldn't even really look up. And the doctor said, if you don't care for yourself, how are you going to care for him? And I think that's something a lot of caregivers have heard, and it really made me mad. But I was also trying to be dutiful and, find support. And so I went home and I Googled, and I started typing in caregiver, and I was going to write, caregiver support or support groups or something. And the autofill that Google has filled in caregiver burnout, and that sent me to a quiz, which I took, that asked about, your levels of burnout as a caregiver. And at the end of the quiz, the result I got popped up this piece of burned bread and said, you're already toast. And I was like, well, that's cheerful.
That's it.
Thanks. and the phrase really stuck with me. And it also, the results said, you need to get away, you need to get a massage, you need to get, do self-care. And I was like, I do get away. And I actually did, make times to get a massage every now and again. I was doing the self-care things, and the experience was so intense. This was at a period after my husband had had a stem cell transplant that had a lot of very, very devastating complications that I tell that story in a lot more detail in the book. But boy, it really felt like, okay, sure, I'll do some self-care. And it's like, no, I want other care. I want other people to come and be like, here, take time off. And yeah, as I said before, we had been getting care for others from others as well. But this extended period, and my really intense years of caregiving were only 2-3 years. And I know that for millions and millions of people, the journey goes decades. And it's rough. And there are no amount of massages in the world that is going to compensate for 20 years and more of supporting a person you love dearly through a really challenging decline. That just the two things are not commensurate. And so I took that phrase as my title, in part because I thought it really expressed so much about, where caregivers are in America today. Like, so many of us and of you who are watching right now are already toast.
Yeah. We are.
Yeah, great title.
Thank you.
So can we switch to your delicious, amazing peach kuchen recipe?
Sure.
Would you tell us why this recipe? What's important about that?
Well, this recipe is one that has been in my family of origin that my mom used to make when I was growing up. And it's both my brother's and my favorite. We both planted peach trees mainly because of this recipe and in memory of our mom. When I was growing up, my dad has an almond orchard. He's an almond grower. And so we always had stone fruit trees down at the orchard. So it really ties into a lot of our family roots. And the recipe was passed along by a dear friend of my mother's, who's still a dear friend of mine today. And so, for me, it's a real comfort food. It's kind of a shortbread crust topped with peaches and a layer of custard made with heavy cream and cinnamon sugar. So it's not a light recipe.
So have a little piece.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I had a big piece last night for dessert, let me tell you. And the scale let me know.
But the reason I chose this recipe when CJ asked me for a recipe is not just because of its importance to me and my family, but also because my husband, since his stem cell transplant, has really struggled with appetite and with keeping weight on. And this is one of the recipes that he always loves and enjoys. And, he'll have an extra dessert and eat an extra piece of it with breakfast. And so, in fact, this morning, he was looking at it in the fridge because I made it yesterday and he didn't touch it because he knew I would be having a sample. And I forgot to tell him, it was fair game as long as he left me a piece to have with you all today.
So
but
funny.
He was kind of like, so what time is your thing? And I was like, you can have a piece now with your breakfast. It's cool. There'll be plenty. So it's a beloved recipe, kind of going on to the next generation in my family, but also one that works for me as a caregiver as a way to take care of him. It's also, there's a few steps, but there's some things you can do ahead. You can press out the shortbread crust. There's some shortcuts, you can use a food processor to make it a little easier to make. So there's, ways you can streamline the recipe for people who are busy and time pressed, as I know literally all caregivers are.
Right.
So,
yeah.
And we have the recipe. I will post the recipe on our Facebook page today, as soon as we all say bye-bye. Kate, you're delightful. I knew that when we first met. Thank you for being here with us today. Everybody want to taste this?
Yes.
I should say it's also,
and anybody
it's also
that
not
got it.
necessarily the prettiest recipe, but it's
Thank you for
delicious.
saying that.
Yes. So don't feel
Anybody
bad
that
if yours
got it
doesn't.
ahead of time, let us know.
Oh,
that
yeah.
you're tasting and because oh my
And
gosh, it's so
what's
good.
really fun is that this recipe is one that my mother was famous for, and my English family has asked me for the recipe. So when Kate said, "Okay, well, my recipe is going to be peach kuchen," I knew we were family, she and I.
And I've never met anybody before who's heard of it
So
or
there,
who made it.
so there. Kate,
it was
thank you so much for being here. And now I will tell you, folks, that the Sweet Spot on Wednesday, April 21st at 1:00, our special Zoom event is going to be with Kate.
Yay.
We have invited Kate to come back because she has so much to share. And I would suspect that we're going to talk a lot about the lack of care and support, societal care and support that we as caregivers receive. So, Kate, I'm saying bye for now, but we'll see you again in a little less than 2 weeks. And folks,
I can't wait.
Yeah, we feel the same way. We really do. Next Thursday on the Caregivers Bakery, you will be meeting Dawn Sully-Pyle, who is a woman of a million different talents, and her background is all over the place and wonderfully so. Dawn was she worked with caregivers, and she has just put together a program called Reimagine Your Role and Restore Your Soul. So you'll meet Dawn Sully-Pyle next Thursday, 1:00 on the Caregivers Bakery. And remember to email us in advance to get all of the recipes. Author CJ Golden at gmail.com and Wendy at heyBoomer.biz. And you will be fascinated by Already Toast by Kate Washington. It really is. I cannot show you this book too many times. It's really wonderful. Um, thank you, everyone, for being here.
Yeah, thanks for joining us today. And we've had some very nice comments, Kate. People
Yes.
that you know,
Oh,
people that
thank
we
you.
know. So everybody loved your talk today. I think it was very important and meaningful.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'll really look forward to being able to actually talk with the community in a couple of
Yes.
weeks.
Yeah,
Yes.
because I'm seeing she's been delightful for a long time. That's from Charlene. I guess she's talking about Kate, not you or me, Wendy.
Yeah, I don't think she's talking about us.
And
I think I know what Charlene that is. Hi, Charlene.
And
and
Patrick,
thanks
I
to
think
all.
you know.
Yeah,
Patrick
yeah.
says this was wonderful. I'm glad I caught this talk. So you
Yeah,
might know
this is
Patrick
great.
as well.
Thank you, Kate from
Yeah.
Gail, and thanks to you all.
Mary.
Thank you. I'll
And-
pop into the comments after I'm was concentrating, so not looking at them right now.
Exactly.
And the you are Wendy Green,
I am Wendy Green.
and I am CJ Golden, and we know that caregiving is not a piece of cake. Let us help you find the sweet spot. Thank you for being here. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.